At least one of the disciples was a zealot. Now we kind of read that. I don't know if you guys realize what a zealot was. Zealots really not big fans of the Romans. They wanted to overthrow the Romans, and they decided the best way to do that was to use force. And so they made a pact. All their zealots and their other zealot buddies, if they were ever alone with a Roman, the Roman would not survive the encounter. They also felt that way about Israelites who worked with the Romans, like tax collectors, one of whom was named Matthew and was a follower of Jesus. Just imagine that first encounter, right? Jesus calls the 12. They come, they do a little meet and greet. Who knows if they knew each other before then, but they go around the circle and, hi, I'm Simon, I'm a zealot. Well, I was a zealot, but now I'm a follower of Jesus. Gets to Matthew, hi, I'm Matthew, was a tax collector, now I'm... Imagine going to sleep that night as Matthew, right? Probably not going to sleep at all, because you're keeping an eye open to see, is Simon really following Jesus now, or is he still kind of zealoty? Another way to say this, that you're not disqualified by anything, is that there is nothing that you need to be able to become like Jesus that you haven't already been given by Jesus. That again was the 2 Peter 1, 3 through 4. His power has given you everything you need to live a godly life. I don't know how you guys feel about English. We're just going to break that sentence down here real quick. His power, so it's all from God or Jesus, they kind of work in tandem there, has given you. Has, by the way, is a past tense word. It means it's already happened. Right? You don't need to come up to the altar today and pray, God, please give me, because he has already given. He has given to you everything. Everything's a pretty big word there. It means everything. I feel kind of foolish for just saying that, but everything means everything. There are some people that like to twist words in the Bible and they say, well, this all means all of this certain select group of people. One of the only things I remember from seminary days and from college days is all means all. And that's all that all means. God has given you everything you need to live a godly life. And that just means a life that reflects God. When you were created, you were made in the image of God, Imago Dei. But when you became born again, when you became a follower of Jesus, you were also remade into the image of God. So if becoming like Jesus is something that you can do, what will that actually look like? What does becoming like Jesus look like? Now, when I was younger, I grew up in an awesome church. It was a Nazarene church, and they really emphasized holiness. One of their key phrases was holiness unto the Lord. So when I heard this and I thought I really should be like Jesus, I follow Jesus, I claim to follow Jesus, I should be holy. Which in my 13-year-old brain meant sinless perfection. That's a really, really difficult thing for all of us. I'm not telling you that you're going to ever be sinlessly perfect. But God does call us to live holy lives. In fact, in Matthew 5:48, he says, be holy as I am holy. So that call is there. There's a tension that we have to live with. There's a striving that we do, knowing that on this side of heaven, we're probably not going to make it completely. And yet, we're striving. But you're never going to be holy by just behavior management. By just, it's not going to work. But as you pursue Jesus, as you follow Jesus, as you fall in love with Jesus, eventually, you're going to love the things Jesus loves. And you're not going to be into the kind of things that Jesus isn't into. By the way, if you're just trying to avoid sin, if that's the only goal, we could have all stayed in bed and not interacted with anybody, right? It's a lot easier when you get around people and have conversations and you're like, oh, why did they say that? Or why did they do that? Or why are they like that? It's like so much easier to not have bad thoughts about people when you're not around people. And yet, it's not ultimately the goal. Even in the passage we read today, Ephesians 4:17, there's a long list of behaviors of which we should avoid. Some of that, Paul said, hey, you should stop doing this. But then he gets to the heart of it. Right in the middle, he says, be imitators of God, therefore, as dearly loved children. And that's what we're trying to do, be imitators. Yes, become like Jesus. Therefore, by the way, means you need to look back and see what all the therefore is there for. So it's context. The whole list, we're supposed to stop doing that because we are God's holy children. And then he says the kicker, and live a life of love. If you were to describe Christ-like character in one word, there would be no competition. It's love. Love is a much better aim than sinless perfection. Like I said, if you just wanted sinless perfection, maybe you can just avoid everybody, just sit, watch Netflix all day. Maybe you can be, I don't know, there's some stuff on Netflix you probably shouldn't be watching, so I'd maybe take that back. Disney Channel, maybe, I don't know. When I think about the people, though, that I have experienced that reminded me most of Jesus, love is the characteristic that was most abundant. One of those people you met, Rolf Kleinfeld, when he was here, spoke at revival. I love his preaching. I love his teaching. And that guy just loved me as a teenager when I knew not too many people loved me. It was amazing. That reminded me of Jesus. So if love is what we're looking for, if love is what we need to do to become like Jesus, the question now is, are you becoming more loving? It's really easy to judge ourselves by our intentions and other people by their actions. You ever notice that? Like, well, I meant no harm. I meant to. If somebody else says something and we don't know if they haven't gotten any sleep the night before or what's been going on with their kids, and they say something just kind of off, and they maybe didn't mean anything by it, but they said something more like, oh, they're. That happen to anybody else? So when I ask you, are you becoming more loving? I don't want you to judge it based on your own intentions. Are you becoming more loving according to those who are closest to you? Would your husband or wife be able to say, man, they are way more loving today? Or man, they've been trying to be with Jesus, they've been spending time with Jesus, they're acting like Jesus now, they just love me better, right? And not just some kind of mushy, warm feeling. That's not what Jesus is talking about when he talks about love. Sometimes love looks like waking up to be with the crying kid so your wife can sleep a little bit longer. Or doing the dishes, or helping in the kitchen, or whatever. I don't know what your marriage is like. But love looks like action, not just warm fuzzies. What about your kids? Would your kids say, man, Dad has just been more loving. I did some really stupid stuff, like I drew on the wall, and normally he would have just whoosh, and maybe he's still, but there was a little bit less in the backhand. I don't know. Again, it's in the Bible, spare the rod, spoil the child. I'm not telling you guys how to parent your kids. But are you becoming more loving? Your coworkers, would your coworkers say, man, Jimmy just the past week, and there's so much stress going on at work, but he's just so much more loving. Next, are you growing in love for your enemies too? Again, it's really easy, right, to love the people that we love, that look like us, that we like to hang out with, that like the things we like. But how do you act toward those who hate you? How do you treat those that curse you? How do you act toward those that voted for the wrong guy or cheer for the wrong team? And next is this process of becoming more loving. Is your attitude toward them of love more and more natural and less forced than it used to be? A lot of us can act loving for short periods of time, right? Like, I got to go to the in-laws, we got Memorial Day, it's a whole picnic, so, okay, be loving, try to be like Jesus for the next hour and a half. I don't have to do that, by the way. My in-laws, amazing. But for like 2 hours, most of us probably be pretending to be loving. But if we're being with Jesus and becoming like Jesus, then eventually it should just kind of be something we do. Again, our goal is to become like Jesus, to become people of love, and not just to pretend for longer and longer periods of time. And a warning, this is another reason maybe people feel like, no, I'll never become like Jesus. This will take longer than we want it to. A lot longer than we want it to. John Mark Comer, who wrote the book that kind of inspired this whole series, I've borrowed some of the phrases that he's had in here in your notes. He talked about how long this process is going to take. He's kind of a guy that deals with some anxiety and anxiousness, and he was talking to his wife one time, just kind of frustrated with the whole thing. He said, "Do you ever think I will become non-anxious? Do you ever think I'll get over this?" His wife said, yeah, I think you'll get there. When? She said, probably about in your 60s. He was in his 40s. And she wasn't like doing it in a joking way or a mean way. She didn't mean anything by it. She was being completely honest. You guys can become like Jesus. But it's going to take some time. Now, it takes a long time because all Christian formation is counter formation. Everybody in here is being and has been formed by someone. Everyone in the world has been and is being formed by someone. Hitler was spiritually formed. And so is Billy Graham and Mother Teresa. Mao. All of our politicians on both sides of the aisle are being spiritually formed. Many of them not in the image of Christ. But it's not a choice today as to, am I going to be spiritually formed or not? That's off the table. We are all being spiritually formed. If you want to be formed in the image of Jesus, all Christian formation is counter formation. I'm going to take you to Romans 12:2 here real quick. Romans, I'll start in 12:1. Therefore, which again should encourage you guys to look back at Romans 1 through 11, find out what the therefore is there for. I'm not going to do that this morning, by the way. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. 12:2. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. You got two options. You can conform to the image of the world, or you can be transformed into the image of Jesus. There are forces that are working against us becoming more and more like Jesus. One of those is the stories that we believe. For example, when you think about money, we grew up in a world that encourages us to try to get more and more and more money. There's a limited supply of money. There's a limited supply of stuff. So success looks like accumulation, having more and more and more money. And not just having more and more and more money, but having more money than everybody else around you. That's what success looks like. That is a story that people believe. And if you believe that, you won't look like Jesus. You'll look like somebody. And in the world, you might look like a success, but you won't look like Jesus. Or you can believe biblically. You can believe what Jesus believed. That God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. That he will care for you. You don't need to accumulate. You can give. You can live freely. You can be generous. The stories we believe will shape us into a certain type of person. Pete Hughes says, the story you live in is the story you live out. So what stories do we believe? And do we believe the stories that Jesus would want us to believe? Next, our habits. Our habits are shaping us. Now, some of us maybe don't think of it like that. We think, no, I've had a rough day and I just want to watch Netflix for a couple hours. I've had a rough day, I just want to scroll mindlessly on the socials. It does become habits, and the habits form you into a certain type of person. If you're endlessly on social media, you're probably being formed into a more anxious person. You're probably being formed into the type of person that likes to compare yourself to others. Well, they got this outfit, why don't I have that outfit? They have this car, why don't I have that car? They have that life, why don't I have that life? Their kids are perfect, why aren't my kids perfect? Their kids, by the way, aren't perfect. The shot that you see on social media probably took 38 different tries to get the one, and they probably still had to edit out the one kid's face and they just had really good editors. We don't think of them as habits that are forming us, but our habits are forming us. What we do, we become. And next, our relationships. I believe it was Pete Scazzaro that says, Jesus may be in your heart, but Grandpa is in your bones. How many parents swore when you were a kid you would never be like your parents? And yet at some point, your kid did something, and you yelled at them, and you had to take a step back and say, holy cow, my dad just yelled at my kid through me. Like, what in the world? I promised I was never going to do that, and yet. You guys ever heard the phrase, I heard this a ton growing up, show me your friends and I'll show you your future. Eventually, the people you hang out with will form you into a certain type of person. We mostly like to hang out with the same people that like us, that like the things we like. Not too many people hang out with the people that root for the wrong team or vote for the wrong people, wear the wrong type of clothes, right? We just naturally tend toward people that are like us, and part of the process of that is we also become like them. We become like the people we love and spend time with. And there are all kinds of other forces that are working against us, but those were some of the big three. we don't realize we're being formed by all of these factors and more. John Mark Comer, in talking about that Romans 12:2 passage, says, Paul is writing to disciples of Jesus in the city of Rome, a formation machine that makes LA pale in comparison. The express goal of the imperial propaganda arm was to take citizens from across a wide array of colonized cultures and to make them more Roman. Paul's goal was to take Romans and make them more Christian. But notice also that the default setting is conformation, not transformation. Meaning, if we don't take our discipleship to Jesus seriously, the odds are very high that we will become less like Jesus over time and more like Rome, or LA, or London, or Lagos, and so on. End quote. So if that's the case, how do we become like Jesus? If that's our goal, if we have all this working against us, how do we become like Jesus? Well, the easy church answer is go to church, read the Bible, pray, and tithe. How is that working for us? I'm not telling you guys to stop doing any of that stuff, by the way. All that stuff is stuff that God uses to grow us in our faith, to help us transform to be like Jesus. But if that's all we got, I'm going to be honest, it is not working for a lot of us. If you look to Matthew 5:19 and Matthew 7:24 and 26, this is in Jesus' most famous sermon, the Sermon on the Mount. Some of the stuff Jesus says in here, by the way, is so radical that a lot of people try to find ways to not take it seriously. We're like, well, Jesus maybe is speaking in allegories. Like, he doesn't seriously want us to live like this. That's just an ideal thing. I think Jesus really wants us to live like this, by the way, guys. But here at the beginning, Matthew 5:19, this is just before he goes into the, you have heard it said, but I say, you have heard it said, but I say. He says this, therefore, anyone who sets aside one of the least of these commands and teaches others accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. So that's one bookend. You go to the end of it, and this is what Jesus says. This is Matthew 7:24 and 26. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. That's 24. Skipping ahead to 26. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. Jesus bookends the Sermon on the Mount with the idea of practice. Practice. I don't know if you've ever thought of yourself as practicing the Christian faith. That's what Jesus calls us to do. We don't become more like Jesus by trying really hard, and that's what a lot of us have done in the past, maybe are still doing. But we become more like Jesus by training, not by trying. Most of you guys can see I am not in the best of shape. Again, part of that is the habits I've formed. That McDonald's app is killing me, guys. You can save so much money on that with the food, and Waistline is not happy with it. So imagine, for some reason, what if I woke up tomorrow and I wanted to run a marathon? Could I do that? They're very quiet in here. You guys are so polite. The answer is no. I'll tell you, no, I could not run a marathon. If I tried to run a marathon, you can call an ambulance and have them pick me up by mile 3 or 4, if that. I used to run cross country almost 30 years ago. Holy cow, am I old. But no, I couldn't run a marathon tomorrow. So what do? What if I wanted to run a marathon? I'd probably have to order new shoes, right? So you go on Amazon or wherever and you get running shoes. I don't even know where you get running shoes from because I would never want to do that. And then you train. Right? The first week, you run a mile a day. The next week, you run 2 miles a day. The week after that, you run 3 miles a day. The week after that, you run 4 miles a day. Eventually, you should probably take a break. I don't know how your body does. And then you keep going. And eventually, you become the type of person that running a marathon is something that you can do. Again, that would probably take a lot longer than I want to admit it would take me to do. But it takes training. And following Jesus is the same thing. There's a big difference between knowing and doing. And an even bigger one from knowing and doing to becoming the type of person who does something naturally as a byproduct of a transformed inner nature. The church in America has built itself around teaching you information. Morning worship builds toward the sermon. We have Sunday school classes. But there's a big difference, again, between knowing something and doing something. And we need to give you guys a chance to actually do what Jesus says to do in all these things that we teach you. We act like you guys just knowing the information is enough, and it's not. And then there's a bigger difference still between doing something and becoming the type of person who does something naturally as a byproduct of a transformed inner nature. Again, I'm sure I could come up with something that we need to serve the community, and we could have like a serve day. Maybe a serve month, right? For the whole month, we'll just serve our community. And a bunch of you guys would show up, you'd sign up, you'd do everything you could to help. If you couldn't make it for those days, you would donate so that we could do that. We could be people of service for a month, for a program. But are we becoming transformed by Jesus to become people for whom service is just a natural outflow of our life? On your journey toward becoming like Jesus, this is a lot more like learning karate than learning algebra. And we do it by practicing the practices. There's been a long list of practices over the generations that Jesus even used some of these: solitude and silence and Sabbath. Things that we need to incorporate into our life. So that eventually, Jesus transforms us to be people that look like Jesus. So again, becoming like Jesus is possible, but it's not inevitable. When I was a teenager, 1,000,000 years ago, my church had a competition. The Church of the Nazarene actually had a competition. Every year, we would go to the different colleges that were in our area. So in Richmond, our area college was Eastern Nazarene College in Boston. We would compete in Virginia. The best of the best in Virginia would get to go compete at Boston. And I played basketball. They had a basketball competition. And one of my friends from church that I played basketball with all the time talked to the coach for whom I had to go try out. And Ryland told him, "You're really going to like Dave Scott. He plays like Michael Jordan." I didn't play like Michael Jordan. I played like Michael Jordan on the ground version, right? Like if he had a vertical leap of an ant, that's kind of the Michael Jordan I played like. It was one of the biggest compliments anybody ever gave me as a kid, right? Like, oh, it's working. But I didn't just wake up one day and say, I want to play like Michael Jordan and go out and do it, right? Like, it takes practice. I would watch his games on my little TV in the family room, and then right outside the door was my driveway. We had the storm door, so I'd run out on commercials, and I would try to do the moves that I just saw Michael Jordan do on my driveway for like 5 minutes until the commercial was done. Then I'd run back, that's it. And I'd go back out and I'd try to do, and then I'd go to church when we had open gyms, because we had a gym in our church, which was amazing. And I'd go do it to all these other, youth group type kids that aren't very athletic either, and like looked amazing. You guys would have been so impressed. Probably not. And I worked on that enough that Ryland said, man, he looks just like Michael Jordan. The same thing can happen to us when we strive to be like Jesus. This is not just a pipe dream. This is what Jesus is calling us to do when he invites us to follow him. This is what discipleship looks like. It's what it looked like 2,000 years ago when Jesus called his disciples, when he called Matthew and James and John and Peter. He said, guys, you can come be with me so that you can become like me. And it's the same thing is true for us. When Jesus called you to follow him, he said, you guys can be like me. Let's pray. God, your love is so amazing. We really can't put words to it. God, we know all of our shortcomings, all of the things that we see that would hinder us from becoming like you. But God, I pray right now we would see your power and your love for us. God, if we would just be obedient in the small things, just in the day-to-day, just you calling us to spend time with you, just to be with you, to look to you. God, to slow down and breathe you in, God, that we could become like you. I pray, God, that this would be a passion that just burns in our hearts. In Jesus' name, amen.